everyone. Good evening and welcome to another episode of Entrada's Classic Conversations. I'm Don Gomes. I'm Vice President of Entrada, and we have at least one other board member here tonight, Susan Snow. Anybody else that I missed? No? Okay, good. We started this almost 5 years ago, and I think this is number 41. Yeah. A lot of interesting people in Wayne County. And we'll be carrying on again in the spring. We've determined that it's just too hard to be in here in the winter. But by spring, the hope is that the Entrada Center will be done, and we'll be in there with heat and air conditioning and acoustics. It'll be wonderful. Well, we do welcome a live audience here at Robert's Roost, and also folks watching on Facebook Live. We appreciate that. Tonight's program, like most Entrada programs, is free. And we started this tradition a few years ago, asking you to pass by the hat in support of the many programs that Entrada offers. Some of you did that when you made your reservation for tonight, and we appreciate that. Thanks very much. If you're watching online, you can go to the website, entradainstitute.org, and make a contribution there. We will open for questions later. Look out. And those of you on Facebook, you can go to the chat function and write in a comment or a question, and Alan Dewey, who's handling our video tonight, will pass that on. Those of you here, we need you to go to the microphone. Thank you, Bernie. Yeah, I'm pointing right where it is, okay? And the reason for that is it's not amplified here, but that way your pithy comments and questions will be on the video forever. Yes, right. So with that, Clotilde Barrett, welcome.
Thank you.
We'll get to Tori in a little bit, but you grew up in Belgium, right? And
yes.
Of course, you're going to read a little bit from your book a little later, but you're the youngest of six, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So before the whole brutalization of World War II, what was it like being a child for you in Belgium?
Oh, quite pleasant. My father was a bricklayer, so I was a workman's family. And my mother off and on kept a little grocery store to help with the income. And so I had a pretty nice life. I had lots of loving parents and loving brothers and sisters. And being the youngest, the next one is 4 years older, so there's quite a bit of difference. And I was, well, spoiled in a way. Not completely.
But they took pretty good care of you, huh? Your brothers and sisters?
Yeah, one of my sisters basically took care of me because my mother was working in a little grocery shop. And so I was brought up by one of my sisters who was asthmatic and couldn't go to school. And she was 13 years older than I was, but couldn't go to work or couldn't go to school. So she took care of me.
Nice. Now, you were born in 1932. That was a tough year all around the world.
I don't remember it.
I know. But I'm just putting some perspective here, because there was a worldwide depression, and in Belgium, coal miners went on strike.
Yes, it was hard on my parents.
Mm-hmm. But your father found plenty of work?
No, because my father was a bricklayer and very ambitious. He wanted to be an entrepreneur. He wanted to be a contractor, but he didn't have any education. So it was, and he was not fluent in French. So he had kind of all things going against him. So life was always a big struggle for him. But all during the war, before the war, after the war, he struggled and struggled till finally, after the World Fair in Brussels in 1958, things changed tremendously, and people started wanting condominiums with bathrooms and things like that. And the construction business boomed after 1958. And one of my brothers was old enough and smart enough to take over the business. And so my father prospered. And he and my mother were able to afford to come to the United States to visit me two times.
That's terrific. You talked about your father not having an education, but you have a lot of education.
Yes, but that was my doing.
Okay, talk
not
about
my
that.
parents' doing.
Okay, no.
He resisted, and
Really?
I fought, and I had to apply for a scholarship. And my father thought it was the stupidest thing on earth for a woman to go to the university.
Different times. huh?
But when it happened, and I got married, and I came to the United States, and he saw all that happened to me, he was really proud of me.
We'll talk about your first experience at college. That was and your interest in order is the way I would put it. But mathematics is important to you.
Well, things were hard for me because I started in French school because my father insisted that I would be bilingual. But when the Germans came, kids from Flemish-speaking parents had to go to a Germanic language school. And I was taken out of the French school, had to go to the Flemish school. And I went to high school in Flemish. But when it came to go to the university, there was no Flemish university in Brussels at that time. And I had to commute because my parents certainly couldn't afford me to stay in a dorm or anything like that. So I had to go to French university. And that was difficult after having been schooled in Flemish, all of a sudden having to go to the university in French. And so I went, and to please my father, I told him I was going to be a professor of mathematics. And that made a little bit of sense to him. So I went into science with the idea to keep my promise and become a science and math teacher. But as it happened, I liked the professor of meteorology. And so I decided to go into meteorology. And that was, in a way, very unusual, because women at that time could not be meteorologists, could not have a profession of meteorologist, could not be employed by the Meteorological Institute, because it was night work. So I left, went to Sweden to continue further education, but I knew that I wouldn't go back to Belgium. And I left happily. And I came to the United States, and I came happily.
Sweden, did you get some kind of a grant or a scholarship?
Yeah, I got a grant to study in Sweden because my specialty was computerized forecasting. And Sweden had a big computer, one of the first binary computers in Europe in the early 50s. And a lot of people from all over the world came to Sweden to get acquainted with that binary computer. And the fellow who became my husband, he went there, he was with the University of Chicago, and he went to Sweden in 1952, 53, also to study forecasting with a binary computer. And so we were in the same institute, the Meteorological Institute of Stockholm, studying the weather forecasting.
That's how you met?
Yes. He was my teacher.
Very nice.
Made it easy.
Talk about the computer for just a second. Today sit at a desk and have a computer sitting there that does probably 100 times what a computer in those days might have done.
The computer took a whole room. There were no chips at that time. They were all, but I don't know what they are called, lamps or transistors, I don't know what they're called. But the whole wall was full of those little devices there. And we had to learn to the language of the binary computer, just ones and zeros. So that's all we had to work with. And I wasn't very good at it. It overwhelmed me. Being in a foreign country with a foreign language at the age of 22, it was too much for me.
But you fell in love and got married, right?
It was easy.
That doesn't take math skills, though.
No.
Talk about that and then the move to Chicago.
Yeah, I moved to Chicago and I worked at the university there for a few months until I had a baby.
And that took your time.
And that took my time. And I gave up meteorology at that time.
How many languages do you speak?
None well. I tried several.
Okay. Well, you're doing very well here.
Yeah, I tried Swedish, German, Spanish. My mother language is Flemish, same as Dutch. But I grew up bilingual, French and Flemish.
Okay. Let's talk about your book for a second.
Okay.
We want to go back and talk about some of your experiences. So you were, what, 8 years old, 9 years old as the war was?
I was 8 when the war broke out.
Did you understand what was going on?
No. No. I had no idea. I had seen soldiers building trenches, but somehow I thought this was for me to play in. And we ran through the trenches and we enjoyed playing there. I didn't have a concept of war, before the war broke out.
When you went off to college, how did those memories help shape you?
The war memories, not so much the war as the pain that my family had gone through during the war, and the sacrifices that my brothers and sisters, my father and mother, all made for me to be able to go to college. Even if I had a scholarship, there were books to be bought. Everybody, all my brothers and sisters gave their salaries to my mother, and in return, they received an allowance. But my mother, we wouldn't have survived if all those salaries hadn't been put together to support the family. And so that's how the war affected me the most, is that the sacrifices everybody made for my sake.
As your children grew, did you share some of your experiences with them?
Not very many, no. No. For some reason, I avoided this.
Well, I think a lot of people here tonight have picked up your book and read it.
Yeah.
That memoir.
In fact, the war kind of had slipped my mind, but what happened in Ukraine woke me up. And it's the war in Ukraine that started me off taking my pen and writing down my experience. before the war of Ukraine, I didn't think very much about the war.
Clotilde, I'd asked you to find a couple spots in your book that you'd read for us. Would you do that?
I don't know. The light isn't very good here. I was 8 years old when the war broke out. On the 10th of May. But it was on a Sunday, May 13th, that I became fully aware of that the war was going to have an impact on my life. I had attended Mass in the small church across the street from our house. On the way out from the steps of the church, I saw a lot of people milling around. Some were on bicycles, some pushing loaded handcarts, some weeping, others saying their farewells. I understood then that the German army had invaded my country. The Belgian military held out against the German forces for 18 days against overwhelming odds. But on May 28, the Belgian king, Leopold III, and the military surrendered unconditionally, and so began the German occupation. The Belgians have never forgiven the king for that. He had to go in exile after the war was over. The war raged on. British bombers were flying over Brussels to slow down the attempt of the Germans to take over the world. Each time the alarm sounded, we were led to a shelter where we had to sing loudly to drown out the noise of the explosions. There was no great destruction in our neighborhood, but a lot of shrapnel was coming down. One of our games was to go to the meadow and collect as many of them as we could. We were ignoring the danger that was facing us. It was extremely painful to watch airplanes from the Allied forces that flew over us being shot down. An explosion was made and made us look upward. Then a big flash of light and the plane coming down amid fire and smoke. Some planes fell close to our house. It was the hardest experience is to watch those Allied planes coming down. Brussels was liberated on September 3, 1943. After the liberation, there were a few months of relative calm in Belgium. But in December 1944, the Germans launched a counterattack in the Ardennes, which was mainly in the south of Belgium. The winter of 1944 was a brutal one for the Allies. Southern Belgium, where the war was fought, it's densely forested and mountainous. The counter-offensive changed by the German was called the Battle of the Bulge. The American forces bore the brunt of the attack. The war ended the following May. So,
thank you. Let's move on to weaving. It's so wonderful that you took the time to do that and realized in your awakening with the situation in Ukraine that you needed to do that. Thank you. In Chicago, Had you thought much about weaving before then, or is that?
No, I was just my first 5 years in Chicago was just getting used to English, getting used to the United States, getting used to be a mother, getting used to be away from my big family, learning to drive, doing things like that. I did start pottery during those 5 years in Chicago, but that's about all. I was basically mothering my children.
Okay. Did you like pottery? I mean, was that?
Yes.
What was it about pottery that attracted you?
Well, I think mathematics and science was never my thing. I think I did it because I wanted to go to the university, and I promised my father to be a math teacher. But I think my heart was never in it. But it was in the arts and the crafts. And so the minute I had some freedom, I started looking to do things that I really wanted to do and not had to do or did for some reason or the other. And I had the opportunity to do pottery. And so that was my first attempt at doing some creative work.
When did weaving come into your life?
Well, that was like 5 years later, in 1963. That was in Evanston, Illinois, and my husband was with Northwestern at that time. And I took a little class held at the junior high school. And the weaving, the drafting of weaving of patterns reminded me of the binary computer. Because even the weft goes over the warp or goes under. There's only two. That's why you can easily draft on square paper by filling squares black or white. And that fascinated me. And I understood that very easily. And I didn't know how to weave, but everybody admired me because I was able to design on paper. But I had that tiny little loom, and I didn't know what those big looms were like. But then I decided to go to Maine, Haystack Mountain School of Crafts, and took a 3-week class of weaving there. And I fell in love with weaving, with the actually weaving, the handling of the fibers and things like that. And that was 1963, and I've loved it ever since.
There's a variety of types of weaving. You've talked about hand weaving and others. Tell us a little bit of the difference.
Well, my main thing is loom weaving and not tapestry weaving. Tapestry is more finger manipulated. Loom weaving is basically binary, up or down. and that's always been my thing, and later on, nowadays you can do that on computers. Like already in the 70s, you could do that on computers.
Create a design.
Yeah, plotting your designs on computers. But in the 70s, when I started publishing a magazine, I became a publisher. At first, I didn't know anything, and this was my very first quarterly publication, the Weaver's Journal, in 1976. And it was done on a typewriter, and then it went to the printers. But it was very, very primitive. This is the last one that I published. I stopped publishing when my husband died, because I lost my grammatical editor. And so this is the last magazine of my 12 years of publishing. And here now I went into color.
That's quite
But-
a journey.
Because I was in this first issue here, I wrote most of the articles, but under false names. It looked like I had all those others.
What were some of your names?
Well, I don't know. I gave a workshop in Quebec shortly afterwards, and they asked me, you know, they wanted to meet that person. Oh, this one I did, but I can't remember the diff. Oh, this is one my husband did. Well, anyway, they asked me who that person was, and I said it was me. But pretty soon, it was a frightening experience because I was going to publish it, and so I had to advertise, and money started to come in. And I thought, oh my God, now I have that money. Now I have to go through with it. I mean, those people paid money for a year for 4 issues. And I'm stuck with it. I have to put 4 issues. And I didn't know very many writers, so I stopped writing. And I said, my husband is in here. He's on the spinning wheel. He demonstrated spinning. He had never spun before.
So the agony of success for you, right? Yeah.
But the 70s was a wonderful year for crafts because it was the year of the hippies, and the hippies were either potters or jewelers or weavers, and it was a wonderful year. Hippies were my best friends. I tried to be a hippie myself. But and the hippies were very interested in ethnic weaving, and they traveled a lot. They went to Peru. They went to the wealthier hippies. Just left the country and, you know, with a backpack and went to all kinds of foreign countries and brought a lot of textiles home from those countries. And I was very fascinated with those. And one of my big hobbies was to study those weaves and see they were almost all finger manipulated. Not all, you know, the Africans use looms. But in the South America used, you know, the looms on frames or with that they control the tension with their bodies. But and all the braiding that was going on, and macrame of all things. You know, you all remember macrame probably if you lived in the 70s. And so I was very interested in all kind of weaving, and I did all of them. And I was interested in interpreting some of those weave structures on a regular loom. And that's basically what I did in a lot of my articles, is to get inspired by ethnic weaving and try to manipulate those weaves so people could do them on a regular loom. And most of my articles over the years were like on that subject.
Did you take on other writers
Yeah.
with real names later?
Oh yes. After the first issue, I got to know more people who answered letters. I asked them to comment, you know, and got letters to the editor. And so I got quite a few.
And somewhere I read you talked about you had to do it all. You wrote the articles, you sold ads, you scrubbed the floor.
Not quite. But in the beginning, I didn't pay anybody. They were all my friends who did it. And my best friend was my secretary. She even made me coffee in the morning. Just like a good secretary would. But after a while, after a couple of years, I started paying people, not very much, but it was nice to be able to thank the people who had helped me by giving them at least a little salary. And so I had quite a staff because they were all part-time. I always told the people who worked for me, your family is your priority. What you are doing for me is after you have taken care of your family. And if they wanted to take time off or this or that, that was all fine with me. And so I had lots of people, different people volunteering, some working only a couple of hours. My secretary was there all the time with me. She was my best friend, and she supported me every hour of the day.
And what was your decision to stop? Because you sold the magazine, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had, how many subscribers? I had 10,000 subscribers, I think, at the end. And when I sold the magazine. And I sold the magazine to somebody in Twin Cities. But they changed the aspect of it. They made it more, not as folksy as I had done it. And they went under. The magazine, the Weaver's Roll, continued for a year or so, and then they went bankrupt. They built a large office with lots of room, and they hired a lot of people, and they wanted to be big, big, big. And I knew that that wasn't going to go because weavers, as a hobby, is done by people who usually are not very wealthy. And weaving has to be a successful hobby, has to be relatively inexpensive. Right now, unfortunately, weaving has become more expensive because people use elaborate looms now, very elaborate, very expensive looms. And the yarns have gotten to be much more expensive. But in my days, weaving was, you could do weaving without spending a lot of money. And you could sell your weaving enough to pay for your yarns. So the hobby didn't cost you very much. And I made, actually, finally I made money with my magazine, but I supported myself mostly by giving workshops. Workshops all over the world. I gave workshops in New Zealand, in Australia, in Europe, all over the United States. And that was pretty lucrative.
And you wrote a lot. Your bibliography is...
Yeah, I wrote several books on techniques. To be able to give workshops, you have to do two things. You have to exhibit. I did a lot of art weaving at that time and try to enter shows and try to get a reputation. And then writing books also, try to get a reputation that way. In order to be successful at weaving, you have to build up a reputation.
What's the favorite piece you ever did?
My daughter's wedding dress. And my own dress to go to the wedding.
That's a true labor of love.
Yeah.
If anybody has any questions, I have pages of questions here. I want you to have a chance to talk with Clotilde as well. And yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, go to the microphone. And those of you online, if you have questions or comments, go to the chat function and Alan will pass those on.
Last year, Alan and I visited the Edge of the Cedars Museum in Blanding, and were soaking up all of the exhibits. And in one glass case, there were weavings that were replicas that you had made of to show the technique, I guess, for weavings that the native indigenous people did with dog hair. And I just wondered if you could tell the story of how that came to be and maybe what research you had to do in order to do that.
My hearing isn't very good. It's the last sentence. Can you repeat it?
Could you tell the story of how you came to do those weavings? They were belts that were replicas.
Yes, they were belts done with dog hair, I think.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, as I said, I was very interested in ethnic weaving at that time. And like the ceinture fléchée, the Indians of Quebec did a lot of, like it's a braid, really. So I did that, and then the idea of weaving with dog hair basically came from the Indians of the Northwest, the Chilkat people. And so combining those things, basically being inspired by ethnic weaving in the 70s and also in the 80s, but mostly in the 70s. I did all kinds of things. I learned to do Hopi sashes, Mexican weaving, all kinds of interesting things. I still love to do those things. In fact, I just put my loom away for the time being, and I'm back into braiding and doing more of the ethnic stuff.
Great. Anybody else? Questions? Alan, anybody chiming in on there? You're quoted as saying there is no. Go ahead, Ted. I'll do this. You're quoted as saying there's no substitute for a good weaving teacher. Is that still the case?
I think so. That's why I also quit very early. I quit teaching in when I was 1961, because I felt I wasn't patient enough anymore. And I tried to teach here in Torrey. Nancy was one of my students. And I had a group of people interested in learning to weave, but they were not committed. And I lost my patience with them, because sometimes if they didn't feel like coming, they didn't feel like coming, and I couldn't stand that. And so
Okay.
it fell apart.
Ted?
Clotilde, you've been telling us about your life. We've got you to Chicago. Tell us a little bit about how you got to Boulder, Colorado, and then what made you want to come to Torrey, Utah? How did you get here?
Well, my husband was with University of Chicago, then with Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, then with Northwestern in Evanston, Illinois. And then that was the hippie days. And he was tired of teaching because people were listening to music while he was trying to teach them. And it was a very frustrating time for Professor, at least for my husband, because the kids were not committed. They wanted easy credit. They didn't want to work. And so he looked for another job. And there was a job opening. He looked to come to Boulder, Colorado. At first, he wanted to come to NCAR, National Center for Atmospheric Research, but he ended up being for NOAA, National Atmospheric and Oceanographic Administration. So we were in Boulder. We were in Boulder for 20 years. My husband was with NOAA, and those were my best years of weaving. I just absolutely loved it there. But my husband died in 83, and 1983, and I was widowed, and we had a beautiful house done by an architect. In fact, it's online. It's called the Barrett House because it was done by a famous architect. But we had to sell it because it was in the mountains, and my husband couldn't drive or we couldn't shovel snow. So we had to move to a condo, and my husband died the next year. And I didn't want to live in a condo. So I was restless, and I wanted to move out of there. But the situation of the housing had changed so much that I couldn't afford a house anymore in Boulder, Colorado. So I looked elsewhere, and my son was a student at the University of Utah, a law student. And when I visited him, he took me around, and one time took me to Torrey, and we saw lots for sale. There were 3 lots for sale on Boulder, Boulder Break area. Mm-hmm. And so we contacted Catherine, and I had just sold a lot. I tried to live in Steamboat Springs, and I had bought a lot there, but I didn't want Steamboat Springs. So I sold a lot for $40,000, and I had that money burning in my pocket. And that lot that I looked at with a view of the Handy Mountains was $40,000. And I thought, that's going to be mine. So took the money out of my pocket and paid for the lot. And I had a boyfriend at that time who was an architect. And when he saw the lot, he wanted to build a house with a reflecting pool, with a tower, with this and with that and with that. And he drew up the plans. I didn't want that house. There was a circular staircase so narrow that I couldn't even carry a basket up the stairs. And I broke up with him, and I broke up with my house plans, and I told him he could keep his house plans. So I looked for, a simple house that was livable, and so I built the house.
Well, a house is one thing, and you certainly make it a home, but talk about your experience here in Torrey.
My experience in Torrey, the greatest. I've never lived in a place where people are so friendly. At first, my experience with Entrada, at first, I was not easy. I didn't know anything about Mormonism. And, people were telling all kinds of stories about Mormons. I didn't know anything about it, but it frightened me a little bit. It seems like a woman alone in Mormon country was kind of strange. I don't know why, but that's the impression, I got. But, and then I do like a drink once in a while, and no drinking. Well, okay. But I had a lot, and there was an art show in Entrada. And so, I'm going to go. And there was, it was in this thing, and the show was basically all over the place. And it was an art show, and it was quite nice. And they served wine. I thought, my God, all the things people have been telling me about Mormons, that wasn't true. I mean, they drink wine. And it made me feel comfortable. It made me feel comfortable in this area that, drinking wine or no wine, at least people were broad-minded enough, that you could drink wine. And I felt that way. My whole idea of what I was going to find here changed. I found people very broad-minded, very accepting, very honoring women, not the male chauvinist thing that I thought it was going to be. I was so pleasantly surprised to find this population in Torrey that was just absolutely wonderful, and I've loved it ever since.
Well, I guess we did good.
I think it's a wonderful community.
Anyone else? Questions? Yeah, go ahead. Clotilde, your family, you mentioned earlier that they did come to visit you here in the
Yes.
United States. When was that? How was that experience for them?
Oh, it was great. They were so proud of me. The first time I lived in Chicago, and my neighbors were Polish people, but he came here. His family came here as a steel worker, and my father, although they didn't speak the same language, right away made friends with my neighbors, and he started doing brickwork for them while he was, and my neighbor even gave my father a gold watch, and he was so impressed. He was so impressed with the neighborhood. It was mostly Polish neighborhood. He was so impressed. He felt so at home, and my neighbor had taken him to a baseball game, and the White Sox, and he was, and my parents had seats because he was a writer for the Steelworkers Union, and he had good seats. He was a good friend of the mayor at that time, Mayor Daley, and got the best seats. And my father was there watching that baseball game, and he thought it was the greatest thing on earth. And he loved the United States. He thought, people were very friendly here and loved it. The only thing he didn't like is going to a restaurant, having coffee in the morning, and wanting some rum in his coffee. And the restaurants didn't know what he was talking about.
Well, I'm glad he liked baseball. That's good. That's very good.
I want to make a comment. I was a professional weaver in the 70s, 80s, and followed Clotilde. We used all her books, and I still love her books. She is an inspiration, and she's one of those people who didn't just throw up hippie kind of work. She knew every detail. She knows all of the in and outs of weaving, and her books were very inspirational to me then. And when we came here in '92 and recycled a house, and I found out sometime later that Clotilde was here, I was so excited because I admire you so much. I have a couple of your pieces, and it's because of Clotilde that a lot of us did the work we did, and I just want to thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. You had impact here before you even got here. See? Wow. Yeah.
I'm overwhelmed.
Oh, you have lots of friends. Yes, you do.
I thank them all.
So, Clotilde, we could talk for hours, I'm sure. But what's next for you? What are you working on?
As I said, I went back to put my loom away, went back to these little things, and I'm doing a project, but I'm so frustrated. My eyesight is failing. And I've worked on that stupid little project for 2 weeks, and finally today I shoved it all in the garbage because I couldn't, my little needle, I had a special name, but I can't thread my needles anymore. Can't, my eyesight is really bothering me, but I still do some weaving. I wove a bunch of little bookmarks to raise money for the lunch program for the senior citizens. And I already made $80 for the senior center with my little bookmarks. And I do some weaving. Fred, he is always good at buying tickets for rafts when I raft something off. And so he has one of my table runners, right?
Wonderful.
So I'm doing kind of, little things. And I don't sell weaving, because I cannot put a price on it. And so I like to weave and donate. I'm going to donate 2 weavings for the entire book.
That's right. For the fundraiser. Thank you.
One of them is kind of strange. One of them is an apron, hand-woven apron.
We often have strange people come to our fundraisers. Yes.
But I like to do that. I like to weave and give as gifts or raise money or things like that. And because, I don't want to sell anyway, but there are little mistakes in my weaving because of my eyesight. And if you sell something, people pay money for it, and they say, oh, there's a little loop here, Can I have it at a discount? No. keep the little loop. or don't buy the piece.
Well, Clotilde, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Well,
and
it's
thank you for
fun
being here in Troy.
And I enjoy the people a lot. I mean,
And
I had always to look that way because, I don't know if it's my eye, but it seems to look more this way than that way. But I enjoy those people just as much as those people. I really enjoyed. Thank you so much for coming and giving me the support all the years I've been here. I don't know, I'm married here again for the second time, but I got widowed again. So, but I always get a lot of support from my friends.
well,
So,
we're glad you're here and you're easy to be a friend with.
thank
Thank you
you
so much.